Hello and welcome to episode number 102 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam.
I'm Sahil.
And we are coming back at you with an exciting one. We saved this discussion from last week for the results to be final, but it is now time to talk about the controversy of the offseason, and that is the rules change surrounding hypothetical unowned draft picks, trading away picks that you do not have.
Yes, it ended up being a lot more controversial than I thought it was going to be. I thought at different times there were agreed upon solutions. I feel like there are different factions that formed. I think it got really tricky really fast. And it seems like we finally reached a solution without much fanfare, honestly, after we kind of reached the conclusion. It feels like, this conversation kind of quickly faded. But do we want to talk about the trades that kind of started all this?
Yeah, let's talk about the trades that started this controversy. We've had plenty of trades that have utilized these picks. But really, there's one in particular that kind of set off the controversy. Andrew got upset about it. This was
the November 15th trade, where you and I made the trade. Actually, I agreed to trade my 2028 second and the next 2100 third round pick I acquire to you for your 2028 second, which immediately conveyed to EBO as part of the future second round pick that I owned them from the Sonny Gray trade that I had made 4 days prior. The fact that the 2100 third was in that pick is actually kind of ironic as well, because that was another instance where we did not specify any time period, and I was kind of annoyed at you for driving up the price in Tyler Anderson. So I made sure that the conditional third that I gave you was as late as possible. Interesting that was not what sparked the controversy, but a 2028 pick sparked the controversy. I was at the time negotiating to make the Lance McCullers deal, which did eventually close later that day. And I was discussing giving a future second to Daniel and Matt. And I don't think that they liked that I had other outstanding second round picks, and they wanted a more firm commitment to get a second round pick in 2023 or 2024. So I thought, hey, how could I reduce the commitment of the outstanding picks that I have to maybe make a second round pick? I would get them more attractive. That's when I contacted you and I was like, hey, would you be willing to do this swap? You were all for it, and we made the trade. I get the 2028 is 5 years from now, the draft is. I actually thought EBO was one of the trades or one of the teams that could take a 2028 second round pick and be fine, because they have so many picks in the next few years. You reach a point where it's so many picks, and they already have a stacked farm system where it's like you can't just keep having a bunch of picks. So I actually didn't think it was a huge deal for them, but Andrew thought that it was a huge deal, and that kind of sparked the whole debate here.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really sure why this deal in particular was the one that caused so much commotion. But I definitely understand the sentiment. I've never loved the idea of trading away picks that you don't own, and having so many outstanding is just kind of it was people compared it to a Ponzi scheme. People compared it to all sorts of things. But here's the fact of the matter.
Ponzi scheme, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that you're trading away assets that don't exist for things now, and promising to give them away in the future when you get them from someone else. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of a weird loophole around not having assets to trade for a player, kind of putting yourself in debt, and teams have no say over the pick that they're going to receive. So we kind of this kind of really sparked a big debate.
Yeah, and so we had the Zoom meetings that were coming up shortly after, to discuss the rule changes and also to discuss trades with the cut down deadline. And I think there's about 8 of us on there, and I thought we had a pretty good compromise discuss. I mean, my whole goal from the beginning was like, hey, like there are 2 competing factions here. Like there are a few people who are on my side. There are a few people on Andrew's side. I was like, hey, like let's come to some sort of compromise in the middle that addresses some of the overarching concerns that people had about the fact that future picks could be traded. And I get that there is, or hypothetical picks could be traded. And I get that there is always going to be a fundamental disagreement over, whether or not those picks should be traded. I mean, like you mentioned, you still personally think it's weird that, we can trade away hypothetical picks, but I also get that kind of there was reasoning behind rejecting that that I wanted to kind of maybe address and try and solve some of those concerns. And the proposal that we discussed was the one that ended up passing. You can't have more of one type of pick outstanding. So you can't have multiple firsts outstanding or multiple seconds or multiple thirds. The penalty for not getting a team a pick in the allotted time period was that you would have to give them double of what is outstanding. And then if no time period is attached to the picks, then it is automatically just 5 years. I thought that would help eliminate some of the concerns of teams not being able to really control what type of pick that they got back in return, while also balancing the desire the allowing 2 consenting teams to make a trade that they think benefits both of them. And I know that Andrew kind of thinks that the whole 2 consenting teams thing is a joke.
Yeah, there's that whole 2 consenting teams,
which I disagree with. I think Greg made a great meme to that. I think an all-time S tier meme, but I think Andrew's overall dissent of it is pretty dumb, and I'll stand by that. I thought the compromise was going to pass with no issue, and then Cam, I'll let you talk a little about this because I've been talking a lot about kind of the vote that went down and how Erik decided we should put this vote together on the issue.
Yeah, so there were really the biggest. We all kind of like the compromise, and I think the compromise definitely gets closes a lot of loopholes and closes a lot of. Not that it had ever really been used maliciously, except for when you used it against me for that 3rd rounder. But it closes any possibility of using it maliciously in the future. And it keeps because at one point there was talk about completely getting rid of trading away any picks 5 years in the future at all. And I'm glad we didn't continue down that road because I don't really like that idea. I think it's fine to do.
Yeah, I think that would have been bad. I mean, I think one of the things I like about this league is that we are creative and that we are willing to kind of, push some of the boundaries with stuff like that. And while I think that there needs to be some common sense rules put in place to prevent taking advantage of different loopholes, I think that banning draft pick trades beyond like 5 years of picks was pretty dumb and just was overly limiting. So I agree with you there. And honestly, other than maybe Andrew, I don't really think there's anybody who was really for that.
I don't think he was actually for it. I think it was more of like a trying to continue down with
rabbit hole.
Continue down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked the compromise that was proposed. Really, the hardest part about it was how to set up a vote. That's what took the longest, really. We all kind of knew that the compromise was going to win out in the end, but we just weren't sure how to do it. We're going to have 3 options. Were we going to start out with a poll about about hypothetical draft pick trading to allow it at all, and then bring up the compromise if it wins, which it almost didn't, and that was almost something. But yeah, in the end, we decided to do ranked choice voting, and that won it in the end for the compromise. We all kind of settled on that overall, as opposed to just kind of free range, laissez-faire, do whatever you want.
Oh, for free range, it makes it sound like it's like some sort of like farm animal. That's like,
I mean, aren't we all?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's true. Touche. Shout out to Greg for coming up with the ranked voting idea.
No, that was me.
Was that you? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Shout out to you with I think Greg explained to Erik how it should be implemented, but you were the one who came up with the idea. So
Right,
shout out to you
yeah.
actually. My apologies there for forgetting that. But yeah, I mean it won out in the end. I think we all knew it was gonna win out in the end. I'm kind of curious that after it won out, there wasn't really any pushback. Like Andrew kind of asked what the vote was, and like the fact that 14 people voted, and we kind of explained that, but he hasn't said much about it since.
Yeah, we were all kind of fine with it.
Do you think? I'm curious what you think about this. Do you think there was any pushback after what happened with getting the whole Tyler Zuber trades banned? That hey, this happened. Now I want to take away something else that you support.
I think not like a malicious, hey, let's take away your thing.
Yeah.
But I think some of the pushback or some of the persistent arguing may have been indirect, or may have been because of that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I didn't really want to kill Tyler Zuber. I felt bad about it, but I mean, I think that's just one of those you have to consistently apply to rules. Otherwise, there is no rule. You could just keep carving out exceptions. And if the whole point of this compromise solution that we came up with was to close loopholes, right? Like we couldn't just keep allowing loopholes with the player to be named later deal. So I mean, I still stand by that. Perhaps it could have been handled in a nicer way than it did, but I still stand by the overall conclusion that happened there. But yeah, I mean, I think in the end, I think this is a common sense solution that we came up with. And honestly, like, I don't think it's going to have that much of an effect. Like, I feel like I'm the one who makes. I don't know if anybody else has actually initiated a trade involving future picks, or if anybody else has actually been on the end of having to give up future picks, or sorry, not future picks,
Yeah.
future picks, hypothetical picks. I think I'm the only one
Right.
who's actually had an outstanding hypothetical pick.
I think you might be. Yeah. No one else has traded away all their picks before.
Right. So I think that it's probably just me. And, at the end of the day, lately it's just been with second round picks, the occasional third round pick. I've only had an outstanding first round pick once, and that was with the Tatis deal. And that is very much a special exception. Like, I don't see that really happening too often. That just puts a lot of pressure on acquiring a first round pick. Whereas a second or third round picks or picks that, you can more commonly just get someone to throw in at the end of a deal. And I think the most outstanding picks I've had of any of those at a time is 2. So I don't think at the end of the day, this is going to make a huge difference for me. And because there's not too many people who make these trades in the first place beyond me, like, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on the other 11 teams in the league. So I think we have closed some loopholes, but I also don't think that the end effect is going to be all that big, especially when compared to the amount of chaos that it caused in the chat and on the Zoom calls and through the polls and all that other jazz.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely nice to not have to worry about it in the future.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess the one last thing to tie a bow on it is there was a trade made in response to these rules, in response to just kind of how ridiculous it is to have future picks. And this was a trade, of course, it was made by me and Andrew.
Of course. Yeah.
Uh, I have agreed to trade the next 2045 third I acquire and the next non-Fantrax top 200 Pirates prospect I acquire within the next 20 years to Andrew for the next 2024 third he acquires and the next prospect he adds in the next 70 days that shares a name with a current Major League Baseball player.
All right, so let me ask you, what happens if he doesn't acquire one such player in the next 70 years? Or
70. And then he owes me 2 of them.
Oh shit. I didn't even think about that. I mean, if you're following off the rules, it's true. I mean, Max Muncy was just cut.
Yeah, he has not added him.
Yeah, I even mentioned it in the chat. Like, why not just add him and just get it over with? Unless the whole point is just to let this multiply, which would honestly be funny. I could see this backfiring on him one day, like 30 years from now, or maybe not even 30 years from now, like 5-10 years from now, somebody's drafted like with the same name, like I don't know, like let's say there's another Josh Smith that's like a really big prospect or something. And then Andrew can't add Josh Smith because he knows that Josh Smith has to go to you.
Well, no, that's not true because Josh Smith was not a Major League Baseball player at the time of the trade, unless he was.
I think there's a Josh Smith in their majors right now. Josh Smith, the Ranger, made his MLB debut in 2022. The question is he what counts in the offseason for y'all? Because like is being on the 40-man count, like what counts?
I think being active in general and not on a
In which case Josh Smith is definitely active because he played pretty much every day starting September 9th when he came up.
Okay, then yeah, I guess he would count.
Okay, yeah. So like
this is Josh H. Smith?
Yes, Josh H. Smith.
Okay, but not like, Josh H. Smith.
No, not Josh H. Smith. But like, let's say hypothetically, like 10 years from now, like the number 1 overall prospect in the draft is Josh Smith. And Andrew holds the number 1 overall pick. He can't draft Josh Smith because Josh Smith would immediately convey to you.
I suppose you're right, and he would still owe me a second one.
Exactly. Like I if I'm him, I just pick up Max Muncy and just be done with it.
No, I'm
really hoping this scenario pops up now because that would be fucking hilarious if that happened. Or like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, there aren't a lot of. I can't imagine something like this will happen, but I mean, I think I get the better end of it because
let me ask you one more question. If it's a junior, so let's say there's an Adley Rutschman Jr. And he happens to be the number 1 overall pick, would that count as the same name?
I would say it probably would, right?
I think so too. Just like I'm thinking, imagine if you all made this trade when Vlad Jr. Was coming up.
Yeah, well, Vlad Sr. wasn't an active major leaguer at that point.
Okay, well, imagine the league existed in 2011 when he last played and you made this trade in 2011. And then Vlad Jr. popped onto the scene and Andrew couldn't add him. I mean, even if Vlad Jr. wasn't a draft pick, like he had a good, start in the minor leagues and Andrew might have been like, oh shit, I really want to add this guy, but I can't because he goes to camp.
Well,
like this is a realistic possibility. What about Fernando Tatis Jr.?
I mean, I don't.
League gets started.
I think it's going to be like 15 years before this would come into play, and I imagine he's going to give me the.
Will he?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure.
I mean, if you can name a bunch of. I guess if he technically picks up, I'm sure there's other random Josh Smiths in the minors just floating around. What if he just picks up one of those?
Well, I don't know. Maybe he will.
Maybe he will. It is definitely a funny thing to think about. Not my favorite trade in the league. Certainly not, but it exists. Anything else we want to say? I mean, this was the only real, no other trades have happened since our last episode. There's been a couple minor ad drops, but nothing really worth mentioning. Anything else we really want to discuss, or are we ready for our next segment?
Yeah, let's get into the next segment. Now that this has mostly been settled. And this is a fun idea that we've had for kind of a while,
I will
for
tell
a
you.
couple months.
I will tell you how long we have had this idea. We have had this idea for exactly 51 days. And you know why we have had this idea for exactly 51 days?
I have a guess, but why don't you say?
Yes, because 51 days ago, at the time of recording, is when Cam and I made the Adley Rutschman deal, and I named my team Mount Rushmore. I don't remember if it was me or you. I think it might have been me who was like, "What if we did Mount Rushmores for each team in honor of Mount Rushmore?"
Yeah, I think that was your idea, maybe. I
think
know I remember when we were out at Wooden Robot, we were kind of trying to break down each team's Mount Rushmore for
we
this
did,
segment.
we did, yeah. We had a good time doing that. We came up with some general ideas. We discussed doing it for a future segment. I think we're kind of waiting for a logical episode to do it. This is a logical episode. And then we just spent some time refining it before recording just to make sure we got all the names. And I think we feel pretty good about this list. How are we going to do this? I think we said we're going to go in reverse order of the standings.
Yeah, let's do it, which means we have the Flexin' Bellies are the first team we are going to reveal their Mount Rushmore for.
Yes, their Mount Rushmore is Nolan Arenado, Cody Bellinger, Justin Turner, and Tim Anderson.
Yeah, I think that's a good list. We talked in episode 100 at length about that trade where they acquired Cody Bellinger. They named their team after him immediately and have continued to have it named after them ever since. And then the rest of these guys, Arenado's been on the team since day one. Justin Turner was on the team from day one until very recently. And Tim Anderson's just another longtime player. They acquired him early on. All have been kind of faces of this team for a while now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are four very good picks. I didn't think there were a ton of obvious picks for this team. I mean, other names we discussed, Luis Severino has been on their team now since July 2019, trade 103. They traded JD Martinez away to get Luis Severino. We decided against Severino just because he's been injured for a good chunk of the time. He hasn't necessarily been a huge contributor. But there wasn't really a ton of other guys we considered. I think in large part, some of the more significant names for this team were traded away pretty early, or they just didn't have that much of an impact. Overall, kind of looking at Nomar Mazara, the 7th round pick, did not have that much of an impact. Billy Hamilton in the 8th round for them in the inaugural draft. Jason Kipnis in the 12th, Danny Duffy in the 13th, just to name a few. So I didn't think there were a ton of options, but I think these were the best options.
Yeah, I think we agree on that. Next team we have is a much more storied, maybe the most storied franchise in league history, certainly top 3, and that is EBO. They have a fun one. We chose their Mount Rushmore as Trey Turner, Shohei Ohtani, Justin Verlander, and Anthony Rendon.
Yeah. These are 4 great names. 3 of them were among their longest tenured players. Turner, Verlander, and Rendon had all been on their team, and Verlander and Rendon's case since the draft, and Turner's case since the first trade in the league went down. And all of them have been traded away recently as EBO has kind of shifted to a new era of their team. Verlander was traded for Ezekiel Tovar earlier this year. He was one of the top prospects. Rendon was traded in a trade that we talked about in episode 100 that was notable for being among one of the worst trades just in league history. Just all of the players flopped. And Trey Turner was just traded away recently for what EBO hopes are some of the future pieces or future faces of their franchise in Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, Jackson Furio. So, but then we also have Ohtani. Why don't you talk, Cam, about why we included Ohtani on the list?
Yeah, so Ohtani was only with this team for really only 2 seasons, but just I think he is very iconically a member of this team. Just the way the inaugural draft went, the way they hyped him up. He will always be one of the most important figures, if not the most important figure in EBO history, and his drafting by EBO being one of the most important moments in league history, really.
Could you make the argument that Shohei Ohtani is the most significant player in M-SABR Dynasty League history?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I don't even think there's a debate. But yeah, Ohtani was definitely included for obvious reasons. I mean, I think he's definitely like the epitome of this activity here, the epitome of the Mount Rushmore or Rushmores. I keep saying Mount Rushmore now when I say Rushmore. It's a problem, but so pardon me if I say that wrong. Kind of like now how I say statutes, because it's a legal term instead of statues. When I'm referring to statues, I have I mess that up so often now. But anyways, other names that we considered here, Matt Manning was an interesting case. He's been on the team all 5 years. I think he is the only player remaining, and I'm going to double check this quickly, from their inaugural draft that has been on their team the entire time, and I would be correct about that. They also drafted Austin Meadows, and Austin Meadows left their team, but has since found their way back to his team, back to EBO. We decided against Manning, even though he kind of represents a bit of the future, just because he hasn't spent that long in the majors, and the time he has spent in the majors has not been super impactful. We also discussed Torkelson after the big Torkelson deal that they made, but he's only been on the team for a year. It wasn't a particularly good year either. Mookie Betts was also discussed, kind of in the same vein as, Trey Turner, Anthony Rendon, Justin Verlander, as like significant players that EBO had owned that, had a big, impact on the field, but they didn't have Betts nearly as long as the other names that we discussed. So we opted not to include him. Was there anybody else that you wanted to shout out here, Cam?
No, I think that's about it. I think we kind of in the end decided to include guys who had more of an impact on the major league team, as opposed to guys who were just in the minors or potentially could be their future names could be on this list if we did it again 5 years from now.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
Yeah. Up next, we have Alex and Zach's team. This was an interesting one. We have Jose Ramirez, Julio Rodriguez, Andrew Benintendi, and Ronald Acuna Jr. This is kind of a tricky one. We have 2 players who have been namesakes of this team and 2 players who were traded for each other.
Yeah. Jose Ramirez was the first overall pick for this team way back when in 2018 when Max and Teo owned the team. And he was on the team for 3 years, probably their best player throughout the 3 years. Maybe you could argue for some other players on that list. I mean, the top of this draft was stacked for these guys, but Jose Ramirez spent the longest amount of time of some of these top end players that were initially drafted by them. So I think he was an easy pick. He was also traded, as you just alluded to, for Julio Rodriguez, who I think is probably their best player over the last or over this year, really. He is the future of their franchise. And was also, I mean, the rookie of the year this year. I think he's already a top 5 dynasty asset. I think this was one of the most significant trades in league history, the trade of both of these players. probably the biggest trade that, or arguably the biggest trade that Alex has ever made. He did also make multiple trades involving Mookie Betts and one involving Ronald Acuna Jr. So he was also on this list. Partially for that reason. I mean, Acuna was on this team for 2.5 years. Was involved in, where do we ended up ranking a trade when it was all said and done? I think it was the second trade. I know you had it ranked second, the Betts Acuna deal.
It was, I don't believe it was second.
Somewhere in the top 5, I think.
Yeah, that trade landed at number 5.
Number 5. Okay, so all 3 of these players were kind of the best players, probably the best 3 players that they have owned for significant periods of time, and also involved in some of the biggest trades in league history. This was another team that was kind of tricky to pick for because there's been a lot of player movement. I mean, you think of Walker Buehler and Zach Wheeler and Francisco Lindor all getting traded, pretty early in this team's history. They did have Mookie Betts, but for only half a season, right? So, that was difficult. And speaking of Mookie Betts, that trade netted them Andrew Benintendi, who they named their team after. Benintendi's Chicken Tendies, I think one of the best names in league history, one of the best names in M-SABR history. Not the best player, but certainly impactful in that regard.
Yeah. Interesting group for sure. I think, Acuna, the fact that they kept their team named after Acuna for many months, even after trading him away, was kind of fun. I will say I'm not sure I love the Julio pick just because he's only been in the majors with them for 1 year. He hasn't had as much of a long-term impact to put on a Mount Rushmore, really. But that's okay. I'm not super bummed out about it. This team hasn't had a ton of huge names over their history.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think there was a perfect 4th player to put on the list. I think one of the themes that you'll see here is that we were able to clearly identify 2 or 3 players, and then we had a hard time selecting a 4th player for some of these teams. Speaking of one of those teams where we had to discuss the 4th player, are we ready to discuss Anthony?
Yeah, let's do it. Anthony had 3 easy ones. He had Trout, Bogarts, and Tucker. And for his 4th face on Mount Rushmore, we chose Alek Manoah.
Yeah, Mike Trout's Mike Trout. Enough said. Number 1 overall pick overall. Did I say number 1 overall pick overall? Oops. But yeah, I mean, he was the very first player taken in the 2018 draft. That's another way of saying what I just said. And enough said there. Bogarts and Tucker have both also been on his team since the beginning. The difference of Kyle Tucker compared to, say, Julio Rodriguez was, in addition to being a top prospect when he was drafted by Anthony, he's also made a very significant impact for him in the majors. So I think it's a good combination there. And do you want to discuss kind of the debate that we had for the last spot?
Yes, we were kind of between a few names. Basically, we wanted a pitcher in there. We were kind of between Corey Kluber and Alek Manoah. Kluber was on the team for, really 5 seasons, the first 5 seasons of the league. But he was injured for a good chunk of that. Let me look at his stats here. Yeah, he was drafted right before the 2018 season. That was a very good year. I don't think he won the Cy Young, but he was excellent that year, to a 9 ERA. But ever since then, over the next 3 years, he pitched 35 innings, 1 inning, and then 80 innings. So dealing with injuries hasn't been very effective. And then this year, he was finally healthy again, and he was kind of mediocre. So really, though Kluber has been there, he really only had 2.5 seasons of health on this team and 1 good season compared to Alek Manoah, who's had 2 excellent seasons in a row for this team. He's super young. And again, not to play into the future angle per se, but he's going to be one of the most important faces of the next generation on this team. So I kind of thought he was a better fit.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we could have gone wrong either way between Manoah and Kluber, but I do think Manoah ultimately has been a bit more impactful for Anthony, even if he spent a little less time on his roster. I agree with that. Anything else
Yeah,
you'd like to say?
especially considering he was drafted in one of the rookie drafts by Anthony.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a big part of it too. Anything else
Wow,
we
Manoah only pitched 35 innings in the minors. That's crazy.
and Manoah's nuts. Remember when we all thought that Nate Pearson was going to be the better major league pitcher?
Yeah, man, that's crazy.
Yeah, this really flip flopped really quickly. I thought Manoah pitched in the 2020 in the minors for some reason. That's probably part of it.
Nobody did.
Yeah, like or sorry, I thought he pitched in 2020 in the majors, but like he didn't pitch in 2020 in the minors, which is probably why the innings are so low, like 35. Like you probably got that plus whatever seasoning they gave him in 20. I'm sure he was part of that camp that they had for the extra players. So do we want to move on to the next team?
Yeah, let's do it. Up next we have, let's see here, Andrew. And this was kind of a trickier one to pick through, I would say.
It was.
But yeah, we chose for Andrew's Mount Rushmore, Will Smith, the catcher that is Crone, that is Cronenworth, and then Carlos Correa and Ozzy Albies.
Yeah, this wasn't an easy one to pick. I think Will Smith we picked for obvious reasons. That was a bad trade I made to give him Will Smith. And Will Smith has kind of become one of the faces of his franchise. I know the team was named after both he and reliever Will Smith for a little while. And then after he traded away reliever Will Smith, it turned into the Crone Zone. Cronenworth, for obvious reasons, the Crone Zone. He's had Cronenworth now for 2.5 seasons. Maybe not the best player on the field, but kind of, given the length of time he's been on the team, coupled with the team name, I think that makes it a very good pick. Do you want to talk about Correa and Albies?
Yeah, Correa was one of this team's draft picks. Really the face of this franchise at the start. They named the team North Korea after all. And then traded to you back in this was 2020. So 2.5 seasons with this team, spent just as much time as Jake Cronenworth, but they did not overlap really, except for, did they overlap at all, or was it?
I don't know.
Either way, yeah, he spent the first half of league history on Andrew's team, was this team's star, was this team's first round draft pick. And yeah, stuck around for a while. And Ozzy Albies was acquired right around that time.
Ozzy Albies was acquired the day after Cronenworth, and the Correa deal.
That was the 10th.
Yeah, was the 10th. Yeah. So yeah, Correa did not overlap.
Yeah, Correa did not overlap with either of these guys.
It's
Jordan Romano
Go ahead.
Jordan Romano was acquired in the Cronenworth deal as well. That's been a good player for them to get as well.
Yeah, that's been a pretty significant name in their history as well. Will Smith was acquired interestingly 8 days before Correa. So like in July of 20 or August of 2020, like all of these players were either traded away or acquired that are on this Mount Rushmore. That's set up again. That's certainly interesting. I'm gonna mess this up in like random context, and people are gonna be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" But
Rushmore.
Not Rushmore.
Yeah, it's funny because the fifth name we were debating was also someone acquired around that time. That's Nate Lowe, someone who really didn't break out until this year, but he's someone that Andrew has kind of talked up for a while.
Yeah, that is a tiebreaker, I think, was that and he didn't really break out until recently, but he is someone that Andrew enjoys talking about. So even when he was not playing well, he definitely had some visibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was
Yeah.
it for who we really considered. I guess one name that we could have discussed, including but we didn't discuss him, was Nomar Mazzara. I think he's more of a meme
Yeah.
than anything that really is worthy of a Mount Rushmore, but I don't know. Any thoughts there?
Nope, that's about all I had. Next team up was Ruthvik and Nick. And this was a fairly easy one, I would say. We chose Rafael Devers, Alex Bregman, Jacob deGrom, and Shane Bieber.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty easy. I mean, DeGrom was the biggest trade acquisition that Ruthvik has ever made. I mean, he fleeced Erik in that deal. I still don't get to this day why Erik made that deal. The DeGrom and Nick Anderson for Steven Strasburg and Jonathan VR trade. And DeGrom and Bieber were the pair of aces that really led Ruthvik in that 2020 season, their best season, when they made it all the way to the semis and were very, very close to making it to the finals. I mean, by the skin of their teeth against EBO. Bieber came to that team trade 104. This was in 2019. They traded Tyler Glasnow, Frankie Montas, Monte Harrison, David Dahl, and Team Cullen's 2021 second round pick to Acuna Matata for Michael Conforto, David Peralta, Darwinson Hernandez, and Shane Bieber. We talked about that on the 100 trades episode, and I'm sure that was in the top 50 somewhere. I'm forgetting off the top of my head where we did have it.
53rd to be
53rd.
precise.
Okay, so for a team that prides itself on its pitching, and I think when we think of Ruthvik's team, we think good pitching, not a lot of hitting. I feel like that's something we have said over and over and over again on the podcast. Is just one change we wish they would make is to become more balanced. But DeGrom and Bieber are definitely kind of the pitching faces of that franchise, and they have been for several years. Do you want to talk about the two hitters?
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Devers has been the namesake for a long time. Came up through the minors. Did they draft him? I know they drafted Bregman.
Devers and Bregman were their second and third round picks. Or
Gotcha.
Kyle's, I should say.
Yeah.
It was back in the day when Kyle owned the team. Bregman was the second pick and Devers was the third pick. A great top three that they drafted because Mookie Betts.
It's amazing with how bad that team was year one. They had the best first three picks of any team, I would say, with the possible exception of Max and Teo. I think
not me with two MVPs.
I don't know. Betts is a multiple-time MVP. Bregman's a runner-up. I'd take Kyle's top three over your top three.
That's interesting. I don't know. I don't know how I'd answer that.
Yeah, but that's basically it. Two guys who've been with the team for a very long time. Both play third base. Both have just kind of carried this team, and they're guys that Ruthvik has no intention of trading.
I'd say so. I mean, he has discussed trading Devers and Bregman before. And interestingly, he has expressed interest in trading DeGrom this offseason if he leaves the Mets. That's certainly a discussion for another time. I certainly have opinions on whether or not he should trade DeGrom or in what circumstances he should. But yeah. Other names we considered, Mookie Betts. I mean, he was their first overall pick. And was part of that big Acuna deal, which we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Alex's team. We also considered Acuna. Neither of them were on the team as long as any of the players that we mentioned, nor had maybe as significant of an impact. So I think this was a pretty obvious pick here. The four that we did.
Yeah, no need to drag it out longer. Let's talk about Conor then. We chose, his was definitely an interesting one.
Yes.
Only three of the four names were White Sox. We chose Yohan Moncada, Lucas Giolito, Eloy Jimenez, and we also put Salvador Perez in there as well because he won him or got him to the finals last year single-handedly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that made picking Conor's team even more difficult was the fact that Conor did not draft his team. We auto drafted his team. So, and we did a pretty poor job of that. So, yeah. So, in reality, like beyond like the top few players that he drafted, the rest of them were either not particularly good or not guys that like we consider like his guys. Yohan Moncada was an obvious one. I mean, he literally named his team Yohan Moncada. I mean, there is not a more obvious fit other than maybe like picking Otani for EBO. I take that back. There might be some more obvious picks later, but for the moment, that's one of the most obvious picks. I think Perez was also obvious. I mean, Perez is one of those players where kind of like Julio Rodriguez, where, you know, he hasn't been on the team as long. I mean, he has been on the team longer than Rodriguez, 1.5 years, but like Perez was the most significant player on Conor's team during his most important season, the 2021 season, where he made the miracle run to the finals. Perez was an all-time trade acquisition. I think one could argue he's the most significant in-season trade acquisition in terms of the impact that they had that very season.
I think you could make that case. I would. I'm definitely biased when I say Framber Valdez, but I don't think even my biased vote wouldn't put him ahead of Sal Perez.
No, I think Sal Perez carried his team to the finals in a way that Framber, because of other pieces that you had, which is a compliment to your team and not a diss to Framber, I think Perez was more important. I think you could have reached the finals without Framber. I don't think he reaches the finals without Perez. And for a fact, I know that he doesn't because I calculated it because I was the one who set me. So that acquisition literally sent him to the finals. So I think that's very fair. But I think we had some debates with the other two White Sox. Do you want to explain why we chose Eloy and Giolito over other White Sox or other player options?
Yeah, so I guess other White Sox, Luis Robert was one of our options, but we kind of decided that Eloy was in the majors longer than Robert, even if he hasn't had as high of a ceiling. He was also the main return in that Cody Bellinger deal as well. I think he was the clear choice there. And then Lucas Giolito has been with this team since sometime during the 2018 season. He definitely had some bad years at the start of his career. Well, one bad year, but he's been an ace ever since. Conor's top pitcher. I think he was an easy inclusion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Two very good inclusions. We all know Conor is all about his White Sox players, so I think it makes sense that 3 of the 4 players are White Sox players. And I think both Giolito and Eloy were great picks. I mean, you mentioned Luis Robert. I think other names that were certainly interesting. Maybe we loosely discussed some of these, but Josh Hader is one that comes to mind. He's been Conor's best reliever for a few years now. Robbie Ray, Conor acquired him for not a lot in the middle of his Cy Young season. I ultimately think that Sal Perez kind of fills that role, though, of player who really got him to the finals in that season. Although, had Conor not acquired Sal Perez, I think Robbie Ray would have had a much better case to make this team. And one name I threw out was Paul Goldschmidt. Conor's only had him for a year, but what a year it was. He won the MVP. But I think we ultimately decided that he did not spend a long enough time on Conor's roster to really justify being on his Mount Rushmore. Yeah. Anything else we'd like to add, or do we want to move on to the next team?
No, let's move on to Yuki's Mount Rushmore.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we chose, there were a few names we were between. We ended up, Bryce Harper was an easy one. We also chose Austin Riley, Randy Rosarena, and we needed a catcher, so we chose JT Realmuto.
Yeah, I don't think you can discuss this Yuki without discussing catchers. I know the first word I think of when I think of Yuki is catcher. Other words I think of when I think of Yuki are Rays and Diamondbacks, but mostly Rays. Anyways, Realmuto is this catcher for 4 years. One of the first picks that this team made, JT Realmuto, actually not even one of the first picks, a 12th round pick that Griffin and Matt made back in the day. That's a great pick to make in the 12th round. Interestingly, came 2 picks after Sal Perez, who we just mentioned, cracking the list. But yeah, I thought he was an obvious choice. Bryce Harper, first overall pick for them, second overall pick in the draft. That's another obvious choice. I'll mention Austin Riley and then let you talk about Randy, because Austin Riley was a trade I made with him. Riley had 2 bad seasons. I traded him to Yuki as a throw-in a deal after I had just acquired Riley, and that really did not turn out well. I also gave him Starling Marte in that deal. I got Javi Baez. Thankfully, I flipped Baez and turned him into Trevor Story, but that one did not look great. Why don't you talk about Randy? Because Randy has a pretty interesting history in this league.
Yeah, Randy may be Yuki's most untouchable player. He was, during that 2020 playoffs, talking about how great Randy was, how much he loved Randy this, Randy that, back when he was having that breakout playoffs.
Yeah.
He would not. And we were all kind of thinking, yeah, he's just the next fad player. He's going to be off Yuki's roster mid next season. But instead, he has had 2 phenomenal years in a row. Great 2021 and an even better 2022. He's a cornerstone of this team. Helped lead Yuki to the playoffs. We definitely underestimated him, and he's one of the faces of Yuki's team now.
No, it's funny because I feel like he almost went from being a little overhyped, like because of the 2020 playoffs, and now he's just like underrated. Like relative to some of these other players who, I hear discussed around his range, like he's been kind of quiet. Like he quietly had a very good year. He was not mentioned a lot in the league chats or anything else, but good for Randy. I think he was definitely an obvious choice. Other players that we discussed included Kenley Jansen. He's another player who has been on Yuki's roster since the beginning, all 5 years. And especially pivotal this year with Yuki's kind of pivot to the reliever strategy. Ultimately, we didn't think his impact maybe lined up with some of the other players that were discussed. Am I forgetting any other names that we discussed for Yuki? I can't really think of anybody else.
No, that's about it. We settled on these guys. Yeah, which team do we want to talk about next?
Looks like Jake's team is the next one in the spreadsheet here. If we want to dive into that.
Yeah, let's do it. We chose we had a few names. We chose Manny Machado, Bo Bichette, Yordan Alvarez, and Sandy Alcantara.
Yeah, I'll talk about Alcantara first. I think that for the same reasons we included Sal Perez is pretty much the same reason why Sandy Alcantara cracks the list. Like Perez, Alcantara has been on Jake's roster for 1.5 years, but he was the best pitcher on Jake's roster in his most significant season, which was this past season when he won the championship. I don't think he wins the championship without Alcantara. So while Alcantara maybe wasn't on his roster as long as some of the other players we're going to mention, I certainly think that if you're looking at historical significance of the player for the team, you have a hard time excluding Alcantara. For the same reasons that Alcantara is included, I think you also include Jordan. Although Jordan has been on the team for a little longer, Jordan was traded to this team before the 2021 season, October 2020. So he's been on the team for 2 seasons, but he was Jake's best hitter for his most significant team. So best hitter, best pitcher. I think these other 2 players that I'll let you discuss, Cam, were also pretty significant.
Yeah, I would say so. Bo Bichette and Manny Machado are kind of the top faces of this team. Bo Bichette was drafted by Clayton and Ryan on inaugural draft day. He is still with this team, obviously. And then Manny Machado was the first ever picked by this team, taken 11th overall, back when he was still with the Orioles. So that's kind of crazy. And then he left this team, and now he is back. He was traded away sometime during the 2021 season. So he was there for the first 3 seasons plus a couple months. Okay, no, hold on. I got this backwards here. It looks like, yeah, they sent him. He spent the first 2 years or so on this team, in the middle of the COVID season, traded to EBO. Then EBO sent him to Alex and Zach that off season, and then acquired back early last season. So he spent all of this season, most of last season, plus all of the first 2 seasons. So really it was just one off season plus part of 2020. He wasn't on this team. He has been with this team most of the time. And he was just so good, especially this year. But also he's just been with the team so long. I think he's earned his spot.
Yeah, I mean, Machado's been very great for the last several seasons. So can't argue that point. I feel like we discussed other players. I'm forgetting who at the moment. I guess like Corey Seager could have been an interesting candidate. He was the second round pick for this team way back when. Although they did trade away Seager pretty early on, I believe after the first season, and only just recently got him back. I think you could certainly make arguments for Matt Olson. JT Real Muto had a very impactful season for this team this year, but again, it's only been 1 season. And I don't think his impact rises to the level of, some of the other guys who we discussed who are on teams for short periods of time, but did crack this list, i.e. Sal Perez. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't really anybody else that I think we considered. I think this was one of the easier teams that we discussed.
Yep. So let's talk about Erik now. Erik's group is interesting because he has a few guys who are also on other people's Mount Rushmores. He has, of course, Shohei Ohtani, who is on EBO's. He has Jacob deGrom, who is in Ruthvik's Mount Rushmore. We also included Corbin Burns and, of course, his namesake, Giancarlo Stanton.
I think was the Ohtani trade the number 1 trade?
It was.
I mean, that one's pretty obvious. That was a big trade. A lot of big names involved in that trade. Ohtani absolutely deserves to crack this list twice, and he's been a significant part of Erik's team for it's been 3 years now, right? He got him pre-COVID season or during the COVID season?
Yes, before the COVID season.
Okay, so 3 seasons now. Giancarlo, for obvious reasons, right? Like, he was the first player that Erik drafted. Erik only has had him for 4.5 to 5 seasons. He traded him away when he got hurt during the second season. I ended up flipping him to Anthony after acquiring him for as part of a deal for Pete Alonso, and then Erik made sure to get him back that offseason. I know it's Stanton is Erik's favorite player. I think he definitely deserves to be included on the list. We did have some controversy for the last two spots. We were considering a couple names and ultimately settled on Jacob deGrom and Corbin Burns. Do you want to explain what those discussions were like, Cam?
Yeah, so it's tough. Jacob deGrom, he was only on Erik's team for 2 seasons, those being 2018 and 2019. However, he won the Cy Young both of those years in real life. Erik won the title both of those years. It's tough because it's so long ago now. But he's an interesting name, even if he was only on there for 2 years. And then Corbin Burns has been with this team for about 3 years. Not quite sure when he added him in 2020 or 21. But he's been an ace for 3 years now. Won a Cy Young as well. And he kind of broke out under Erik's team, so I think he's earned his spot there. And just a few other. His was definitely difficult. We thought about including Jose Ramirez. He was kind of the name that got cut, but with him only being on the roster for the last 2 years, not having any major awards like deGrom and Burns do, that kind of knocked him out of the Mount Rushmore for now. But I could see him being there in the future.
Absolutely. I think other names that could eventually, make this round Mount Rushmore. We didn't talk about him, but Wander Franco, a very significant trade for Erik when he got him, a trade that doesn't really look great in hindsight for Jake. Erik got him for Gleyber Torres and Mike Clevenger. But Wander has not done a ton in the majors so far. He dealt with injuries this year. He had a solid, albeit not spectacular season when he debuted in 2021. So the jury's still out on him, but the talent is immense. I didn't think there were really any other big names that we left out here. I think it was really a big debate for the last 3 spots between deGrom, Burns, and Ramirez, like you mentioned.
Yeah, that's about it. Only 2 teams left, and those are ours. Why don't we talk about them?
Yep. Let's start with your team. Your 4 players were Juan Soto, Aaron Judge, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and Yu Darvish. Cam, this is your team. Take it away.
Yeah, so I think Soto, Judge, and Vlad are very easy ones. Soto I acquired after that first season. He's been one of my stars. He's still super young. Been my best player at times. Aaron Judge, currently my best player. He was my second ever draft pick. He really has been phenomenal the whole time, but this year put it all together and had a historic season. He was league MVP. Vlad Guerrero Jr., maybe my best hitter last season, him and Soto. He was one of my early draft picks. I saw him all the way through the minors, and he's been with my team ever since. And the last spot was tricky. Could have gone in a few different directions. The first guy I left off was Walker Buehler, who was my ace for a couple of years, including winning League Cy Young last year. But in the end, I kind of wanted to go with Darvish. I just have such a soft spot for him. He's kind of followed my team's trajectory. I acquired him very early on in the league, one of the very first trades ever made. And he's kind of stuck with me ever since. He struggled that first year and for most of that second year, and then has just kind of become an ace once again, refound his form over the past 3 years, and he's just been so steady and so consistent, I couldn't leave him out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are 4 really great names. I agree with all of the names that you put on this list. I didn't think there was really much dispute when we discussed this. I mean, we also discussed Buehler and Wheeler. Did you give any consideration to Francisco Lindor?
Not really. He's definitely an interesting name. He struggled for a little while after his first season with the Mets wasn't amazing. This year he was back to his old self. He was remarkable, one of the best top 3 shortstop in the league this season. But yeah, I think the other guys, I wanted to get a pitcher in there, and I think even if I didn't, everyone was just a cut above him overall.
Absolutely. Anything else you'd like to add about your team, or should we move over to my team?
Let's talk about your team.
All right. My 4 players were Jose Altuve, Freddie Freeman, Christian Yelich, and Garrett Cole. I thought this was an easy group of 4 here. Altuve, Freeman, and Yelich were my first 3 draft picks, and they are 3 of the 4 players, the other being Nick Castellanos, who has been on my team since the very beginning. Jose Altuve was coming off an MVP season when I acquired him. He did not quite repeat that season in any of the seasons I've had him, but he has been still amazing throughout these 5 seasons, other than kind of struggling during the shortened season in 2020. He's been a consistent force in my lineup. And he's just he's lived up to my expectations when I made him my first overall pick. Freddie Freeman was my second overall pick. He won the MVP in 2020 with the Braves. He was absolutely bonkers, and that was the season I won the championship. So he was my best hitter, best overall player in a championship season for me. He absolutely deserves to be on this list. Christian Yelich, I mean, he's obvious. Third player that I took, I wrote the article about him for the M-SABR website way back when, saying that he was my dark horse pick to win MVP in 2018. And sure enough, he did win MVP. 2019, he played even better. And I'm convinced the only reason he didn't win the MVP that year is because he got hurt in mid-September and didn't finish the season. Cody Bellinger ended up winning the MVP that year. He has not been as good the last 3 seasons. 2021 especially was rough, but he still did post a top, I want to say 40-ish season indie player rater. I think he's settled in more now as kind of a 15 to 20 homer guy with 15 to 20 steals and a very high OBP. I don't think he's necessarily going to rebound to his MVP form. I think the back injuries, unfortunately, have caused him to suffer a bit. But my God, I mean, I was the big league Yellow champs up until I got Adley, who, for obvious reasons, I named my team after, and who sparked this whole discussion of Mount Rushmores. So Christian Yelich is probably one of the most obvious Mount Rushmore players on this list. Garrett Cole was the last one. Garrett Cole, beyond the players I drafted, has been the longest tenured player. He has been by far my best and most consistent pitcher. On a rotation that features some very good names. I've had Aaron Nola, Brandon Woodruff, Max Fried, Julio Urias, Carlos Carrasco, and Patrick Corbin had some good years for me. Madison Bumgarner. Cole has been there through it all, both through kind of some of the older rotations I had and this newer rotation. He's been the ace of all of them. Led the league in ERA and Ks in 2019. He could have arguably been my playoff pitching MVP in 2020, but I ultimately gave it to Carlos Carrasco coming off of the cancer diagnosis. He's just been amazing, whether it's with the Astros or with the Yankees. And I can't imagine my rotation without him after I acquired him from Anthony right before the trade deadline in the first season. And I'm not going to retell the story because I told it in episode 100, but shout out to EBO for giving me the motivation to make the extra push to get Garrett Cole in season 1. So I thought these were 4 pretty obvious names. Was there anybody else you thought that I should have considered? I thought it was pretty easy for me, and I didn't really consider anyone else.
Yeah, so you have not yet mentioned Kyle Hendricks. He was one of your faces for a very long time. You cut him earlier this year. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Kyle Hendricks was on my team for a little more than 4 seasons. He was very solid throughout that time. early on, I think he was one of my top starting pitchers. And then as I acquired some better names, he kind of got pushed down the depth chart. He lost some of his consistency over the last couple of years. He wasn't quite as good. But ultimately, he wasn't the frontline performer that Garrett Cole was. And Garrett Cole has now been on my team for 61 days longer than Kyle Hendricks was. Kyle Hendricks had the 6th longest tenure on my team with 1,520 days. Cole had 1,581. So I thought Cole was a pretty easy pick over Hendricks, even if Cole, and it would have been the case even if we did this activity after last season and Cole had been on my roster for less time than Hendricks did.
Yeah. Well, all right. There you have it. We have everyone's Mount Rushmores. Yeah, this could, as a very fun exercise. We're through 5 seasons of the league. A lot of interesting storylines, interesting players that we've all had. And I'd be curious to see how differently these all look 5 years from now.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I don't know if we'll do this, but I'd love to like if we predicted who teams Mount Rushmores would be in like 5 years. Like, I'd be really curious to see what names we would come up with. I mean, presumably there's some players who like we just absolutely would not be able to guess because they're not on a team's roster currently, or maybe they haven't even been drafted by a major league team. Or were just recently drafted, i.e. someone like a Drew Jones or a Jackson Holiday. But I think that could be an interesting exercise. But I think we picked 48 very good names here, or not quite 48 names because a couple of these players appeared twice. But this was certainly fun to put together. I think this is a nice way to look not only at some of the players that we have seen recently kind of dominate the league and be significant parts of people's teams, but also nice to look back at some of the names from especially the first 2 seasons of the league, which, I think in a lot of instances we forget about a little more because it happened in the pre-COVID time and when a lot of us were still on campus. And now, a lot of what's happened over the last 2-3 seasons has kind of been, after we all have graduated and kind of in a different stage of our life. So definitely nice to reminisce a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We've, yeah, I agree. A lot of that pre-COVID stuff does get neglected, stuff before the podcast era. But yeah, nice to kind of look back after 5 years. We looked back with the 100 trades. We're going to be looking back more in a future segment, perhaps next episode. But we'll keep you all in the loop as we get ready for our 6th season of the league.
Absolutely. No, I can't believe we are already about to start the 6th season. But yeah, I think that wraps this segment up. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off here, Cam?
Yeah, no, until next time. Let us know if you have any issues with your team's Mount Rushmore, if there's anyone you want us to add, anyone you say there's no way they should be in there. But other than that, thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, would definitely love to hear people's opinions. And until the next time, this has been another episode of The Pitcher or the Hitter.
I understood every word that it said. And now that I've actually heard it, you're going to regret. And I'm not the kind that likes to tell you just what you want me to. You're not the kind that needs to tell me about the birds and the bees.
This podcast is good.